You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. During this podcast, I'm talking with Bhav Patel, Director of Experimentation and Analytics at agency Lean Convert. With over 10 years senior experience across major brands, Bhav has more than qualified to provide an interesting insight into best practices in his field. Bhav is also the founder of Crap Talks, a place for a bunch of like-minded people to get together and share ideas and thoughts on CRO, analytics and product. Today's subject is why measurement frameworks are becoming a hot topic and why it's important to have a common language that overlap multiple interdependent departments. Bhav, whilst researching measurement frameworks, I came across Oxford Academic, who advocate the use of psychological frameworks within clinical psychology. Their framework seems to somewhat align to those who are responsible for website conversion. I quote from a paper written by Susan Llewellyn and Katie Afia Van Doorn. Clinical psychologists are trained to apply a number of different psychological frameworks in their work. The clinical psychologist will use a particular framework depending on the service context, client preferences, research evidence, clinical guidelines and their own judgment. So as we as CRO specialists deal with human behaviour, albeit of website visitors, shouldn't we use frameworks to help define our processes to become more repeatable and measurable? So Bhav, what exactly is a measurement framework?
Thanks, John. So for me, a measurement framework is a language that allows everyone to communicate in a way that is easily understood with each other. So if you think about an organization and the type of people within that organization, you have everyone from a product team, a marketing team, a finance team, a analytics team, an engineering team, whoever it might be. And a measurement framework allows everyone to ensure that when they're referring to terminology, when they're referring to metrics, they're all speaking in a way that is clearly understood at an organization level. So if you think about the fact that, if maths is a language to understand the world, a measurement framework for me is a way for organizations to understand each other. And the thing about a measurement framework is that it's quite bespoke to most, to organizations. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have organizations that will have similarities, across other organizations. So if we think about Just Eat and Deliveroo, theoretically, their measurement framework will be almost identical, but there will be nuances within it. So a measurement framework for a company is just a way for them to understand how their business operates, what is the thing you really care about, and then what are the things that ladder up to that thing you really care about. And it gets everyone talking in the same terminology when they're talking about, a new customer, an activated customer, a retained customer, a churned customer. What exactly do we mean? And having a clearly defined measurement framework gives everyone a way to understand what levers they can pull and the impact it will have on a specific part of that measurement framework. So, sorry, it's a bit of a swings and roundabout answer, but I haven't actually come up with a very academic definition for this. And maybe this will be an action I take after this call, is to write the official definition of a measurement framework within the context of an e-commerce or a digital business.
Yeah, because what I heard there is you've used terminology, which is what is a customer, what is a churn, all those different sorts of things. And yet, as you said before, that could be slightly different from each organisation and how they implement that. Do you think there's the kind of a potential for a kind of defining what a customer is, defining what a churn customer, a returning customer, all those sorts of things, so that somebody can actually use, I would describe it as a playbook, for instance, to be able to say, actually, yes, those are the kind of the guidance of which we look for, but actually our nuance is slightly different to that. But I think when we start talking about frameworks, everybody kind of gets, oh, that's great, I'll use a framework. Where do I go for the framework? And I'm not sure there is such a thing defined yet. And it could be that, this spurs you into beginning to pull that dictionary, if you like, or, discussion about what each of those things are to be able to help define what that framework could be.
I think I agree. And I mean, we marketers effectively, that's what we are, CROs, product, whatever you want to call us. We do love a good playbook, don't we?
We do.
And I think we do love a good playbook. And I think maybe there is a universal need for one that helps define a core skeleton or structure that people can leverage. But if we go back to the research paper that you quoted, and you talked about specifically about the clinical psychologist will use a particular framework depending on the service context, client preference, research evidence, clinical guidelines, and their own judgment. I think an element of that needs to be applied within our own worlds, right? I think a playbook, yes, it can set you up nicely, but there's so much required to make the framework your own and bespoke and something that is very unique to you as an organization, and that will come through this type of research or understanding the organizational preferences of what is the ideal customer profile. So can you come up with a definition of a customer? Yes, of course. I mean, a customer is someone who engages in a transaction of some sort with you as an organization, be it through the purchase of goods or services. So yes, at a very high level, but I think you then need to go deeper into things like ideal customer profiles, and that's where it starts to become a little bit more nuanced. So especially when churn is one of my favorite examples. I think everyone generally understands the concept of a customer.
Yeah.
But a churned customer is something that is so unique. So if you think about an organization where a customer has to sign up to your product, right? And we sign up these customers and they register with us, but there's no such thing as a hard churn in many of these organizations. You just get a customer who goes dormant, right? And they're not actively using the product. They haven't gone and deleted their account, because let's face it, who does that in this day and age? So they just go dormant. So we have to classify what do we call a churn. And in some organization, it could be someone who's inactive for 3 months. In others, it could be someone who's inactive for 6 to 12 months. So I think this is where taking that mindset from the Oxford academics that you referenced, and especially in the space of clinical psychology, taking that mindset into applying that into our own organization is critical. So yes, of course, I think there is a need for some type of playbook, but I don't think even the best playbook in the world will create the perfect solution for your organization and its very unique needs.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it gives that kind of platform of which to do your own thing on, and I think that's all where I think that there is a necessity to do that. The second question that I would ask is, who would actually write that playbook or that measurement framework? Is it somebody in marketing? At what level in marketing? Is it cumulative kind of everybody feed into this? How would you get that to be generated in a new organisation or an organisation that doesn't have one already?
Oh, I like this question, because I think there's no right answer to this one. Again, so I hate when I can't give a very black and white answer. It really bothers me, because it's the equivalent of just saying it depends, and I hate saying it depends.
Yeah.
But I will give an answer to this question that I will try to give ownership to someone. But if we start off with what the challenge is the fact that in most organizations there isn't someone who owns the bridge, right? And what I mean by that sounds like a really weird thing to say.
No, that's a really great phrase, I should say.
Thank you. And it's no one owns that bridge, and you have your BI teams or your data teams and your engineering teams. So they're the people who take the data that's produced, they process it, they put it through ETL processes, they aggregate it, and they surface it and make it available to people to use. You have the producers of the data, so you have your engineering teams who are sending those events, via front-end or server-side tags or whatever it might be. They're sending this data into some type of data warehouse for cleaning. Then you have the consumers of that data, which are your marketing teams, your product teams. And there's a point where someone isn't owning the bridge. Everyone's so concerned with the destinations of of these three individual destinations. So producing the data, cleaning the data, and using the data, but there isn't anyone who goes ahead and owns the bridges that connect the three parts of the organization together. And who owns this is one I've been wrestling with for the better part of the last 10 to 15 years of my career. I think, for me, having recognized the gap in ownership of that bridge, I've taken responsibility, and so my team has, and we're typically the product analytics team. So I try to own it when it's about connecting product data between data engineering and the product teams, And when I've worked with marketing teams, I've taken some level of ownership in terms of connecting the data that marketing platforms produce and the marketing teams. But there isn't in many organizations, they don't have this type of role. And sometimes it could be marketing, sometimes it could be product, sometimes it could be BI or whoever it might be. In my opinion, the bridge should be a well-embedded analytics team. But if that doesn't exist, let's say you have a centralized BI team or analytics team where they lack context, then it should be the product team. So the product managers effectively become that bridge between the engineers that they have in their teams and the data people who and data professionals who take the data that the engineers produce and turn it into into this product that can be used. So it then becomes the job of the product team to become the builders and custodians of making that measurement framework. So it's such an it depends answer. I'd like to think an embedded analytics team should own it, but in a world where an embedded analytics team doesn't exist, I would push that ownership to the product teams.
So it's interesting because I've been sales for half my life, I've been in marketing for half my life, and one of the things that I've always found is the brand ownership tends to sit within marketing. They do issue brand guidelines, how you use the logo, what the space around the logo should be, what the colours of the logo are. So it seems to me that would sit more naturally in the kind of the defining of what we do and how we do things with our customers and potential customers. So it's interesting to hear you from an analytical point of view saying, well, actually, it's the data that matters. It's not how you use it. Potentially, I may be putting words into your own mouth. But I think that there will be this kind of argument between organisations to say, well, we should be owning that. And the analytics, well, no, actually, I think it's more important to that. How do you kind of come across that where does it sit type of conversation? Because I know marketing directors will be looking at their brand people and saying, well, this is all about brand. How we discuss who people are is a brand issue. It's nothing to do with data. That they're just feeding us bits of information. I ask the question, do you think it's going to be an easy task to be able to put ownership down somewhere inside an organisation?
It should be. I mean, if you work in an organisation with smart people, the smart people, of course, are going to talk about the creative aspect of what they do. But they should also be asking the question, what impact has what we've done had on the broader organisation? And for the record, I just want to clarify, I don't think the data is more important than how it's used. I think how it's used is always going to be more important. So I just want to clarify. I don't want anyone walking away with the fact that Bhav's advocating, like, no, forget how you use the data. It's just the important thing is having the data. It's not. How you use it is always going to be more important. But who owns it is an important part of how it's used. And in your, going back to your point there, if you have got a marketing team or a brand team, who are like, well, we don't need data, we're talking about brand and things like that. Well, I would argue that that's a cop-out or a way to excuse yourself of any type of ownership in terms of what you're doing. Because doing brand activities is not a cheap exercise, having your brand aligned to certain color schemes and tone of voice and logos and whatever it might be. That is not a cheap exercise. This costs money. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources. And if you're going to invest that time, effort and resources, you need to find a way to measure it. Now, it may not be a traditional way to measure it in the sense of like conversion rate, for example, but this is where having a measurement framework is so important, because a measurement framework isn't just an exercise to say, yep, we know what we are a data-driven organization because we have a measurement framework. It helps you understand when you do some type of activity, be it some branding, some marketing activity or some product activity, you understand actually what is the link from that activity to the top of that measurement framework, and you have to understand, okay, maybe branding won't affect something like add to basket rate or checkout conversion or something like that, but it will have some other levers or dials that it's turning in order to add value. And I think it comes down to, like, a measurement framework helps you understand the value that you're adding. Sometimes it's pounds and pence, other times it's something else, and or engagement, for example. It's just a case of trying to understand what that thing is. If branding is all about just fluffy tone of voice and how we want to be perceived and things like that, then I would argue that how do you know if what you're doing is working?
Yeah, I like your "it's just fluffy" and things like that. It's quite interesting. Sitting in marketing, we as marketers, you kind of hear that a lot from lots of different people. But obviously, I would stand and say, actually, yes, there is some elements of fluffy marketing. It depends which particular organisation you're in. That's always going to be the change. But I want to take you to a comment you made on one of your LinkedIn posts a few weeks ago. And kind of throw in a measurement framework into that, because a measurement framework may seem like a framework that you have to work within, which, if I paraphrase what you said a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, it said some people may see this as working in autopilot mode, which you said kills critical and creative thinking. So how do you set the record so it doesn't become a framework which is rigid?
Thank you. I like that you're challenging me on something I've said. It's like there's no one I like debating more with than myself.
You don't need me at all.
No, but I like that you've connected the pieces together. So I should clarify, like a framework. So there's two aspects to this. Autopilot mode is just the task of when you've switched off, like you've done something so many times that you've just it becomes muscle memory, and the measurement framework is not. It's yes, to some extent we are creating muscle memory in the sense that, hey, we're about to do this piece of work. What are we trying to move? What metric? What impact are we trying to have? What value are we trying to deliver as an organization? But it's by no means a way to like guardrail yourself into thinking creatively or critically. The idea around measurement frameworks is that, okay, we have this framework that governs how our organization operates and makes money. It is the fundamental, it's the fundamental structure of our ecosystem. But that doesn't mean that you're bound by the rules of it. What I'm trying to say, and when I talk about measurement frameworks, is that if you know what those rules are, it's easier for you to break them, right? And again, I'm talking very abstract. Let's be really, really specific here. Imagine, I imagine most of the listeners of this podcast are CRO professionals.
They are, yes.
CRO professionals understand the concept of things like significance, and significance is defined by things like your confidence value or your p-value or your critical index, whatever you want to call it, right? And that critical score you normally define as like 5%, so 5% confidence. So when you're running an experiment, you understand that when you say, like, we're talking about 95% confidence, what we're saying is that there is a 5% chance that any winning result could still be a false positive. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean you have every single experiment has to be run with the same statistical rigor. The idea is that if you understand the concept of p-values and you understand the concept of statistical significance, you can then bend those rules and in a way that makes sense and is most relevant to you. You're not bound by that 95% confidence. That is just an arbitrary number. And the example I would use is if you're running an experiment on the checkout page where it's really fragile and you want to make sure that you really don't interfere with someone who's ready to convert, you would probably use a much higher threshold for false positives. So you might use 95, you might even use 99%. But if you're operating on the homepage, you're making changes on the homepage, you don't need the same level of rigor. You don't need your experiments to be so statistically bound by this number. You can drop that to 90% or even 85%. And as long as you understand the risks associated by doing so. So you make that judgment call. And the measurement framework is exactly the same. You have this framework in place to help you understand what is the underlying governing body of your organization, how it makes money, and how all of the metrics are interconnected with each other. But that doesn't mean you're bound by them. You can break them. As long as you know what the rules are, then it's okay to break them.
Okay. Could you align a measurement framework with an ROI?
Ooh, can you align a measurement framework with an ROI? I think a better way to put this is a measurement framework doesn't give you an ROI; it reveals it.
Yeah.
And what I mean by this is, and I'll draw on a topic I talked about not too long ago, and I talked about the fact that data teams and analytics teams are always considered. There's this debate: should a data team or analytics team be a profit center, or should it be a cost center? And most people will lean towards the fact that an analytics team is going to be a cost center. And other people will, and obviously naturally, the analytics team will say, well, no, we're not a cost center, we're a profit center. I would say we're somewhere in the middle, where I would say analytics teams are a profit enablement center. So we don't directly generate revenue, much like having a measurement framework won't directly generate ROI, but it helps you reveal and identify how you generate ROI. Or in the case of analytics teams, it can help you identify opportunities to make profit or become a profit center. So, we will never be the ones who build the product. We'll never be the ones who go out and do the marketing activity. But if we can help identify opportunities in the market or a gap in the customer experience or a problem with the user journey and and surface that to the people who make these decisions, we effectively become a part of the organization that enables profit, thereby becoming a profit enablement center. So I would say that a measurement framework, you can't directly tie an ROI to it, but you can surface and enable the concept of an ROI towards other parts of the organization by having a very transparent framework in place. Does that make sense? Sorry.
No, it does. Because I wasn't saying actually you could directly align it to an ROI, but it has to have ROI involved in it at some point, because you need to be able to make sure that what you're doing reflects positively rather than negatively on an ROI of a particular action or whatever's happening on your website. So yeah, I think you've answered it. It's a bit of it depends, but I think we're all in this it depends world when we're talking about CRO and conversion and all that sort of thing anyway, because it depends on a lot of different things. One of the things
sorry John, the reason I talk about it being as an ROI enablement center, and maybe I misunderstood your question, because you're right, I don't think you directly expected me to be able to say like, hey, this is how you generate ROI from a measurement framework. But the most powerful thing about having a measurement framework in place, and I've seen this firsthand, I've seen teams do a disservice to themselves by measuring the wrong metric and seeing flat results, all because they were tracking something that had no business being tracked in what they were building, like product teams building something and then saying, hey, we're going to measure conversion. Like, well, no, this is ridiculous. You're never going to move conversion. What you were going to do is you were going to move this metric, which is directly tied to this metric, which is tied to conversion, right? But and they were doing themselves a disservice. On the flip side, I've seen teams taking credit for a metric that is completely unaligned with what they do, just because it randomly moved, right? And I think having this in place creates this transparency that allows people to understand, hey, and this can work in any part of the organization. This can work in HR, this can work in customer service, it can work in product or marketing, whatever. So as long as you understand what the metrics are that are tied to your part, your team or your part of the organization, you're in a much better position to be able to like accurately talk about the value you're adding.
I'd like to just take a couple of steps back into when we discussed about where should measurement framework sit, who's responsible for it. There's one part of being responsible for it, and the other part is how do you get buy-in into a measurement framework? Because you are potentially offering a constriction to the way that people might work, and there's often resistance to change. And I'm just trying to think, this sounds like a brilliant idea that everybody gets on the same page. Getting people onto the same page is always challenging. Do you have any tips and tricks of being able to get an organisation to buy into a measurement framework?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. Someone asked me the same question recently, and it really got me thinking about how, because let's say you're a product person or a CRO person and you're listening to this podcast episode. You're not going to go in, tomorrow or Monday morning or whenever you listen to it and suddenly change the organization by saying, hey, we're going to build a measurement framework and have everyone become data driven and understand which metrics they're responsible for, because it's just not going to happen. So the way I did this when I worked at Hopin and when I worked at Gusto was that I started asking the leadership team questions about how their product is performing, and I'll use Hopin as an example because it's my favorite. It's one of those success stories that I've tied my sort of like purpose around because it worked so well. When I joined Hopin, the product team, really great team, but they largely spent all their time building features, shipping features, and not really asking how it was performing. And when I would talk to them about like how are you tracking this, they didn't really have an answer for it. They didn't really care, or maybe they cared, but because they weren't being challenged, it was like, well, Bhav, no one's asking us these questions, so why should we bother with this?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I went and spoke with the MD, I went and spoke with the VP of product, I went and spoke with the VP of engineering and VP of design. And we had a fortnightly leadership meeting, so I was part of that leadership group. I was like, guys, the fortnightly meeting that we have, it's very delivery focused, and we're not stopping to understand the state of play in the organization, how we're doing. So I started building a framework, and I started saying like the first 10 minutes of the meeting were me going through the data, and whenever I came across a point where I would ask a question on how this feature of this product is doing and we didn't have any data for it, I just left a big blank slide saying we don't have any data on this. And slowly, week after week, we started seeing numbers change, and they were like, well, Bhav, why has this number changed?
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. You don't have the data in place. So they would then go and speak to the product team, and the product team were like, oh, we don't have this data in place. And then that product manager or product director would come back to my team and be like, hey, Bhav, we've been asked this question, which I've instigated. They just don't know it. And they're like, can you help us build this framework? And slowly, we started doing this for every single product team that I worked with at Hopin, and we had this. I used the heat map to say, okay, for each team, going down in rows, do we have a core metric? Do we have a bunch of supporting KPIs? Do we have a report in place? Do we have the data in place? And when I initially started, this heat map, if you will, was mostly red. So we didn't have metrics in place, we didn't have data in place, we didn't have reports in place. And working with that product team, the analysts in my team, working with the product teams, they started turning this map that was largely red to green. So they started defining metrics. They started building those metrics. They started building that initial report. And slowly, this trading meeting that I'd introduced at leadership level started being populated with all the data that we had. And by the end of it, I was working with our COO defining the company's North Star metric. And it took almost a year to arrive at this point, but it was something I chipped away at. And maybe some organizations will get there faster than others, and some will take much longer. But by starting with the hard questions to the leadership team, like, guys, I have no idea how the product is performing. So you guys aren't asking the right questions. We started this top-down change that had a massive domino effect across the entire organization.
That sounds like the start of a journey which obviously has borne fruit at the end of it. I know I'm probably mixing my metaphors there. But I think one of the things is that because people don't talk in the same terms that you're talking and I'm talking about now about measurement frameworks, they kind of got their head so much into their job that they're doing at that time, and that it's all, I won't say it's all, but it's the majority of things are results driven. People don't have time to put their head above the parapet or above the water and take a breath and say, okay, what's different? So I was just writing some notes while you were saying that and thinking, gosh, there's so much into this that could benefit an organisation. Where's the resource that people can go to find out more about this? And I don't know what you've done thus far on it, but it certainly feels like me that it should be something that's talked about more openly. It should be something to talk about the benefits, the alignments between departments inside organisations and things like that. And I was just thinking of a title while I was going through this, designing and working with measurement frameworks, because I think it is a real benefit, but nobody sees the benefit because they're too deep in the weeds, and they have to stand out of the weeds to see it.
Exactly. I think you do need someone who can take a step back and look at the entire picture. And this is why it needs to be driven from the top-down part of the organisation as opposed to bottom-up. Like, of course, it works bottom-up, but if the people at the top aren't asking the questions and like, hey, it's great that you guys are building this stuff, how is it doing? Or it's great that we launched this new marketing campaign or this new product line, how is it doing? What's changed? What can we do different? What's going to drive change this time next year? How are we going to grow? How are we going to overcome shifts in the marketing landscape? And this starts to move on to, asking bigger and better questions, which probably isn't the topic for today, but it all starts with having a measurement framework in place. If you can create a world where anyone can go in and understand how things are performing, they're in a position to be able to ask, what's changed here? Why is this flat? We did this, why haven't we seen an uplift or change? What are we going to do differently? And these, I call them 10,000 foot view questions. And you can't answer those 10,000 foot view questions unless you can see the ground level questions or operational questions. Yeah. And they're very different questions. So, the ground level questions are, why, what happened to conversion yesterday? Why was this down? Why was this up? Or, whatever it might be. How did this campaign do? But the 10,000 foot questions, they're the existential questions that we need to ask to be able to drive organizational change.
So, Bhav, I think there's a topic in this measurement framework that can grow and grow and grow. But what I'd like to do while I've got you in this podcast is for you to talk a little bit about the things that you do with your crap talks. Now, excuse the terminology, but the acronym is Conversion Rate Optimization, Analytics and Products. And it's a series of events and talks that you do. Could you give me or our listeners, a little bit of a flavour for those that may not have heard of you, and talk about the format and things like that, and how often it happens, and perhaps some of the topics that you've covered in recent past?
Crap Talks it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek name. The acronym actually was born. It came about from my friend and ex-colleague Ollie Shears, who is now the CTO at Huel, and I started this community about 8 years ago, maybe even more. I've lost track of time, and it was born out of frustration where I'd been to this big event. I can't remember. I think it was like Marketing Week Live or something like that. And each day of this week is dedicated to a certain track. And I'd naturally gone on, it was a Wednesday, I'd gone to the data and analytics track. And I remember the first talk was a panel discussion. And on that panel discussion was my manager's manager's manager. And this person had no business being on a panel discussion about data and analytics, because they had no idea what they were talking about. And I very quickly realized that everyone else on that panel was exactly the same. They had no business being there. They were big, fancy job titles and very little credentials in terms of the data space. And I started realizing this was happening like a lot more in the industry. There was more focus on the big, fancy job title, more focus on attracting sponsors than there was about the distribution of knowledge. And I wasted an entire day. I left with a bag full of swag and an empty mind. And I couldn't believe that I'd spent the day at this event when I had a million things to do back in the office. So I said to myself, I'm going to start my own event, and it's going to be a community level event by practitioners for practitioners. I have some very strict rules. One is you're only allowed to speak at my event once, and that keeps me on my toes. It prevents me from getting lazy, inviting the same old circuit speakers going, back over and over again. It keeps me from, getting just a bit more relaxed, and I have to keep finding fresh talent and fresh voices. I'm really, I'm really proud, because Crap Talks has opened the speaking door for so many people, where my event my meetup community has been the first event they've ever spoken at, and then they've gone on to thrive in that, in a very, to go on and speak at bigger, and I wouldn't say better events, but certainly bigger events. And yeah, we run it like 4 to 5 times a year. It's usually hosted by some of the great tech companies in London. So we've hosted at Just Eat, Expedia, Moo, you name it. We've Zego recently, Zoopla, and it's a really nice, friendly community event. And it's for, like I said, it's for practitioners by practitioners, and it's in some ways become a bit of a cult actually, which I love.
Sounds very positive. What's the kind of numbers you get to these events? I know it's probably going to vary to whatever time of year it is, but are you talking about small little cafe of 5 or 6 people, or are you talking bigger event than that?
Bigger than that actually. When the very first event was like 8 people in a room. We had a couple of beers and we talked about data. Now it's at its peak. I think we reached pre-pandemic. We had 190 people at the offices of Expedia.
Wow.
Now we kind of average at about 80 to 90. And what's great about the event is I always do snap surveys, and I'm a very data person, so I collect a lot of data. And it's usually 50% first timers and 50% returning attendees, which is great, because it's, my acquisition strategy is working, and so is my retention strategy, if you had to give it some business names. And in terms of like sorry, you're going to ask about topics.
Oh, it's just, yeah.
In terms of like topics, it varies. So we cover a range of topics, from data topics, product topics, CRO topics. A recent one, for example, was by my friend and ex-colleague called Matt Rikoshinsky, who talked about how the company he's working at are using the Duolingo model of Markov chains to determine the probability of where users are going to end up. It was a really great talk. And, very, on a very parallel and completely different topic, we had someone called Kate Wood who's a technical product manager at Moo, talking about the challenges she's facing as a technical product manager and crowdsourcing information from everyone about how they can solve her problems. It was really fun. It was really great. So the topics vary so much, and the speakers vary so much. But there's always something in it for everyone, which is at its core the heart of the event and the meetup community, is that there's something in it for everyone.
So one of the things that delights me in what you do is that this is not a sales pitch. This is not some corporate stuff that's coming down from above saying how good we are and how great things are and you need to come this way. It's about people learning from people who are in a very similar situation, trying to be able to be educated or even pass on that education to other people. So I think it's the word community is a really great idea. So how do people find out about this? Where do they go to be able to sign up and get to their first event?
So you can, if you're interested, you can go to meetup.com and just search for Crap Talks. We have two chapters. We have a London chapter and we have a Manchester chapter. The Manchester chapter is organised by Becky Lecoq. She runs the events up north. She's been doing it for nearly 5 years, I think. And the London one has its own meetup page as well. And so you can find us through there. Alternatively, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn and you'll see me post about it. We also have a Slack community that you can come and join and ask questions. Mm-hmm. The short link for joining the Slack community is bit.ly/crapslack1. And you can come along and ask questions and meet people. I usually announce events there as well. So there's a number of ways to stay on top of when the next event's going to be. But LinkedIn, the Slack community or Meetup are usually the best ways.
So Bhav, we're drawing this to a close. It's been one of the most energetic and exciting podcasts I've had. I can feel the passion at the other end of the microphone here, or my headset. And it's great to have somebody with passion that really believes in what they're doing. And I think you've got absolutely something to talk about to lots and lots of people. Many hundreds of companies would probably be desperate to have, they may not call it a measurement framework, but to have some way of being able to organise people to talk the same language without necessarily going to whatever might call it a playbook or a product bible or whatever it might be. But I think this kind of measurement framework has got wings and should fly and be part of the organisational structure of marketing and analysts and even sales to a degree, because they have to really understand as well what's going on to be able to understand the nuances that happen back end of the company, not just those that they're sitting inside. They're part of the organisation. So for now, Bhav, thank you very much for your time. It's been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been one of those things that energises me, and if it can energise me, I'm sure you'll be able to energise 1,000 more just like me. So thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.